open government run by private banks.
Well, and of course, when you look back at say what was being planned, and just prior to going to Copenhagen, Obama's on record as saying, no, this is our opportunity to get one world government. And the UN is the vehicle to do it. And so they'll use the UN, and then once they've got what they want, they'll push the UN aside. This is the standard pattern. I was interested in your comments about Schwarzenegger. Of course, what Californians need to know is they've already had a taste of false energy policies because Enron, who were going to control the whole carbon market, were advising California and are a major cause of their economic problems.
And by the way, Schwarzenegger, it came out, was involved with Enron in meetings and profiting. Then he ran against Gray Davis, blaming Davis. Davis, for all his faults, was blocking Enron. And Enron, for those that don't know, he later became Secretary of the Army, but Secretary White was the Enron executive. They had fake computer programs that they would bring the legislature in and show them, and congressmen in, and say, here's why you're paying triple for power. This is what we bought it for. It was a fake system. I mean, these guys are just complete frauds, and Schwarzenegger is saying San Francisco will be underwater, despite the fact that it's 938 feet at its highest point. Its median sea level is over 600 feet. The UN claims it'll only rise a foot to a foot and a half, and that's bogus numbers. Holdren says 13 feet, but Schwarzenegger says 900.
Well, and of course, Holdren, there are the science czar. There are emails in there in those hacked files. He was involved in this when he was at Harvard, and there's an interesting little story with that. But in 1998, the carbon credits idea, of course, got grabbed by Gore, and there was a meeting in the White House in 1998 with Bill Clinton, Gore, Lord Brown of British Petroleum, who has been very big in this in Europe, and Ken Lay of Enron. And there they set out this strategy of how they were going to use the carbon credits to set up this whole control of energy worldwide. So, there's several little fingers to this, but they've all been working around the IPCC as their science and then the UN as their vehicle. And, of course, that's precisely what Strong said when he was asked by Elaine Dewar, a wonderful journalist, who started out, by the way, Alex, to write a book in praise of Canadian environmentalists. And as she did her research, she found out they were more corrupt than the people that they were accusing. And so she ended up writing a book called Cloak of Green that says, look, here's what these people are doing behind the scenes. And Morris Strong very clearly identified in that. And when he said that he was going to shut down the industrialized nations, she said, well, why didn't you run for office? Probably the only honest thing he ever said was, you can't do anything as a politician. And he said, I'm going to go to the UN where I can get all the money I want and not be accountable to anybody.
And now he's been caught stealing in the oil for food program involved
exactly. Well, that's one of the reasons that it's believed that he's hiding out in China, because the U.S. government want to take him to court over that, as well as Kofi Annan and their two sons. So, Strong has achieved his goal, and of course, it goes back to the Club of Rome. This whole idea of one world government, and of course, the Club of Rome came out with the limits to growth. Grossly simplistic ideas that, we were going to run out of this and we were going to run out of that. All of their predictions have been wrong, yet they continue to have such influence.
Yeah, for those that don't know, in the early 60s and then in 68 again, they put out, and we've actually gone to the library and gotten these, they're in my film Endgame, the Club of Rome reports, and it said that by the 80s we were going to flood, there was going to be an ice age, then they said by 2000 we were going to flood. Holdren said we had to double our CO2 to heat the earth in 77 or we would all die in an ice age. That's in the news today. And these guys, they're not wrong. They're just coming up with new frauds as flim-flam men to con people.
Well, that's exactly right. And if you look at the strategy, and it's the Saul Alinsky strategy, that if you want to establish a new government, you've got to show that the current one is corrupt and get rid of it. And, of course, one of the ways you do that is you find one fault or error, and you simply magnify that and say, look, the whole thing is corrupt because this one part of it is corrupt. Now, what Madoff did, of course, was completely unacceptable, and certainly the largest fraud, simply because the size of the economies have grown. But to say from that, as they did, that the whole market and Wall Street and the banking and everything else is corrupt, and therefore we have to take over. This is a Saul Alinsky strategy.
And let me stop you, Doctor. You're absolutely right. Who is saying we've got to get rid of capitalism? It's the same big banks that actually engineered the crisis, and their new system is just them having more power.
Exactly. And here's a quote. I mentioned the limits to growth, which, of course, turned out to be completely wrong. And Julian Simon, an economist at the time, challenged them, Paul Ehrlich, and he said, look, you name any minerals you want, any time period you want, and I'll bet you by the end of it there will be more minerals available and there'll be lower price. Interestingly, Ehrlich then got John Holdren to go and pick out the minerals and to set the time. And, of course, it turned out that Julian Simon won his bet. But they then published in 1974 a book titled Mankind at the Turning Point, because already there were questions being asked about the cooling thing. And Stephen Schneider at NCAR was starting to switch ships because the global cooling ship was sinking. And so they were starting to shift. And here's the quote from Mankind at the Turning Point, 1974. It would seem that humans need a common motivation, either a real one or else one invented for the purpose. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. And there it is. And that's why, now, of course, the pollution, people started to deal with that because we all recognized that the environment's an issue. And by the way, one of the
yeah, they take something, hold on, you're right. They take things that sound reasonable and they candy coat their agenda with that when it has nothing to do with it. And all about humanity and helping the third world. But when you read the real treaty, it's going to double energy prices for the third world, resulting in mass death. I mean, that's a fact.
Well, as H.L. Mencken said 60 years or more ago, he said that the urge to save humanity is always a false front for the urge to rule. And so he pinned it right there. But of course, he's cast aside as a horrible cynic and so on. But he was looking at the reality of it. So, as I say, out of that Club of Rome quote, we've dealt with the pollution. They said famine. Well, 1976, they had a conference in Egypt on famine and food, and of course, turned out to be absolute nonsense because by the year 2000, the problem was there was too much food. They were paying American farmers not to grow stuff. And so all of what they've touched on has turned out to be a bust.
And now because of ethanol, a third of the U.S. production and other production around the world, we have a doubling in food prices and millions have conservatively starved to death. They couldn't be happier because whether it's Kissinger or Ehrlich or Holdren, or Prince Philip, or Ted Turner, or Jacques Cousteau, or Dr. Eric Pianka, or Peter Singer, all they talk about is setting up a planetary regime. Gore Vidal, 1969 Playboy magazine interview, about how we need a global government to kill these people.
Yep, and of course, I published an article on the CRU and its history, the Climatic Research Unit at East Anglia, where the files were hacked, and one of the people that's sort of remained under the radar, Phil Jones, the director, has been asked to step aside, and they're already doing the cover-up because the person that they've hired to do the investigation has a terrible record himself, and is in public saying that the global warming due to humans is proven beyond doubt, and he's going to investigate this. But what the
Stay there. Got a break, Doc. That's like having Henry Kissinger as the first head of the independent 9/11 Commission. Stay there. We got plenty of time to break it all down.
This is an emergency alert. Do not take risky vaccinations this fall. I'm Dr. Leonard Horowitz, a Harvard-trained public health expert, urging you to go to fluscam.com and learn the secrets behind the current flu, who's behind it, the labs it came from, and the vaccine poisons. Learn why Barack Obama's science czar recommends vaccinations to sterilize people to reduce populations, and why oxysilver is making